Isn't that part of the learning curve of being a human being? Of just knowing that sometimes we just need to do things differently. I always believe that when God talks about saving us, that God sometimes saves us just from ourselves, from our own foolishness, from our own stupidity sometimes, from our own stubbornness sometimes. Oh, there's no one stubborn in church this morning. What does Jesus say about service? What does Jesus say about what our lives should look like as disciples of Jesus Christ? What does Jesus say that our lives should contain as those who truly believe and who are trying to become as Christ-like in all our ways as we possibly can do? You know, we have a saying in our church, and we've been using this phrase for a number of years now, that we are the hands and the feet and the heart of Jesus Christ in the world. And you know, you could add a whole host of other things to that phrase, but I think what we try to sum up in that is that our whole lives, our whole beings, should be in model of who Jesus is. That our hands, our feet, our heart, all of who we are should be in model of Jesus. And I think that's what Jesus was teaching his disciples today in our reading. That really to surrender to the presence of God in our lives means that we become the vessels of Jesus Christ in the world. And he said to his disciples, that, remember he was just about to go on a missionary experience, to travel out to preach to the people. He'd become quite popular by now. And so he sent his disciples on ahead of him. And he said to them to go on ahead of them so that they would prepare the ground for Jesus. Prepare the people to hear this good news of Jesus Christ. And so the disciples went out. I love the way that they went out 2 by 2. I think Jesus said something about protecting ourselves sometimes. That sometimes we're not just to go out 1 by 1, but to go out in pairs. I think the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses have learnt that one over and over again. No, not to go out on your own, but to go out in 2s and sometimes 3s, sometimes 4s. Sometimes just go out in a whole barrage of people to get them, to win them for Jesus. But Jesus sent them out 2 by 2 so that they could be protected, one with each other. I think that's sometimes to protect ourselves from our own false humility and pride, and sometimes just to be reminded of the central gospel. Sometimes to have 2 testimonies is better than 1. And so he sent them out 2 by 2. And he sent them out, and I love this story because it reminds us of the power that the disciples were given. They were to go out 2 by 2, and the story goes on to tell us about whether they would be welcomed or whether they wouldn't be welcomed, and if they weren't welcomed, to shake the dust off our feet as a testimony against those who don't submit to the authority of Jesus within their lives. But I love this phrase, and this has got nothing to do with the sermon, but I'm just going to use it because it was in the reading. But it said that the judgment upon those people would be worse than the judgment of Sodom on the day of judgment. And the reason why I love this is because Jesus is directly telling us what the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was back in the Old Testament. And Jesus is saying it's got nothing about homosexuality. It's got everything to do with hospitality. It's got everything to do with the reality that Jesus expected people to be hospitable. That was one of the great rules of the Jewish tradition, that when you came into a city center, not that they had city centers like we have in downtown Los Angeles, but the gated community that they were a part of, that it was their responsibility to welcome the stranger in their midst. And we know that in Sodom and Gomorrah that was not happening. And so Jesus directly refers to this in this gospel and says, their sin is worse because they were not hospitable to the people that I sent in my own name. That's got nothing to do with the sermon, but it's a great catch-all to be reminded over and over again that we are worthy people and that we are loved by God. But what Jesus really instructs the people to be is about people of service, to be about people who are offering hospitality one to another, to be a people who are really concerned about modeling their lives, aligning their lives with this great principle that we are not only just brothers and sisters, but that we are called to be hospitable, to be loving, to be kind, to be generous, to bring people in and to allow them to witness the presence of Jesus through us. That Jesus really expects us to be about service, to be about those random acts of loving kindness. That Jesus really expects us to divest ourselves of the things that perhaps are a stumbling block to our own lives, to divest ourselves of the negative things of our lives, and to really invest ourselves in being positive, about being kind to one another, another. Now, I know I said this last week, and I'm going to say it over and over again in my preaching, because I truly, truly believe this, is that Jesus expects us to do these acts of service, to be forgiving people, to accept the love of God within our life, without an investiture in the outcome of our kindness. Without an investiture in the way that we so often work on a reward system. Even as children, we work as a reward system. You pass a test and you get a gold star, and you learn to use the potty right, and you get a gold star. And we're very much a reward-centered kind of a peoples. You give the biggest donation to the church and you get your name on a plaque. Isn't that true? We live on this kind of reward system. And I think sometimes we live our lives on that kind of a reward system. Even as adults, we live on that kind of reward system. If I please mummy and daddy, they're going to give me a pat on the back. And we all work for pats on the back. Not Reverend Pat on the back. Although some might like that. I mean, we're a fully inclusive community of faith here.
Amen.
But we all work for those pats on the back. I think sometimes we believe in a God like that. That if we continue to do good, God's going to pat us on our back. And if we do something wrong, then God's punishing us. Now think about that for a moment. That when we don't feel that God's blessing is upon our lives, we sometimes believe that God's grace has been removed from us. That God's presence has been removed from us. Some of us grew up in churches and theologies that taught us that over and over again. That if we don't feel that God is blessing us right now, then we must have done something wrong, and it's time to get on our knees and confess. And we go through that whole list of things. What is it I might have done? And without realizing it, it's not about God withholding God's grace from us. Sometimes we just need to acknowledge that perhaps we've moved away from God being center to our lives. And that's not that God has moved, it's that we've moved. If God feels far away, who moved? I don't believe God ever moves away from our lives, but I believe that sometimes we can move out of being in total sync with God's presence in our lives. What does Jesus say about service? He sends the disciples out 2 by 2. And I love the end of this story. When the disciples return, when the disciples finally catch up with Jesus, and they're so excited. You can almost feel the energy in the reading this morning. They're so excited that, they went out a little bit skeptical, perhaps, that they would be able to do things that Jesus told them that they could do. But they come back and they're like, oh, goody, 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 goody. Even the demons flee in Jesus' name. They suddenly realize that everything that Jesus was doing and teaching wasn't just centered around Jesus, but it was centered around this way that this world, this new realm of God could truly live. That they were able to do the things of Jesus themselves. That gives me great hope, sisters and brothers, that we are also able to do everything that Jesus was able to do. We're able to cast out demons in Jesus' name. We're able to feed the poor in Jesus' name. We're able to do whatever it is that we desire to do, provided that our focus and our attention is about doing it in Jesus' name. Not to cause attention on ourselves, not to get our name on a plaque, although that's nice, not to find a reward system, but to do it because we know it's the right thing to do.